In this topic, we're going to talk about intelligence and how to measure it. Okay, so now let's begin. Okay, so first, it's important for us to define what is the meaning of intelligence and what are its characteristics and how do people view intelligence. Okay, so many people consider intelligence as the primary trait that sets humans apart from other animals, but what is intelligence and how do we define it? Okay, there are so many ways to define intelligence, and there are so many ways that we differ from animals. And intelligence is one way also to describe a person. Okay, is he of high or average intelligence? But it's not the only way to describe a person. Like, for example, we can describe a person through his personality characteristics, okay, like the big five, the ocean. But we can also describe the person based on his or her intellectual capacity. Okay, so is intelligence the same with generally being smart, or is it more complex? Is intelligence a single ability, or is it many different abilities? So, in other words, the existing models in understanding intelligence tend to be in conflict with each other because they have their own definitions and descriptions of intelligence. So, in other words, intelligence can be defined in a number of ways, and even experts in the field cannot agree on a single definition of what intelligence is. Okay? But as psychology professionals, we believe that intelligence exists, and if intelligence exists, our role as future psychologists is that we should be able to measure intelligence. Okay, that's one of the most important competencies of a psychologist, to be able to quantify or to measure or to make a conclusion about a person's personality and his intellectual capability by measuring his or her intelligence and personality. And there are different ways to measure intelligence. Okay, and these measures of intelligence are anchored on the different theories of intelligence that we have, which I'm going to present to you today. Okay? Because we do believe that by measuring intelligence, we can predict a lot of things about an individual. Say, for example, success in school, success at work, success in different things that he's going to do, and other related things such as being a leader, being competent in different things, learning a skill, coping with different difficulties. Okay, so those are the benefits of measuring intelligence. Okay, and if it happens that a person has lower intelligence compared to his peers, then at least we'll be able to know early how can we give interventions to this individual. Okay, so we can answer questions such as, should this person continue his education in a regular school, or is there a need for special education? Okay, if he or she has intellectual difficulties, then what are his strengths? Okay, so how is he doing in comparison to other third graders? Is he more intelligent? Is he at par with them, or is he or she less intellectually capable compared to his peers? So those are some of the reasons why we would like to measure intelligence. Okay, so let's take a look at the specifics in this discussion. Okay, so let's define intelligence. So there are many existing definitions of intelligence, but for this topic, we can agree that intelligence is a set of cognitive skills that includes abstract thinking, reasoning, problem solving, and the ability to acquire knowledge. Okay, so in other words, if we take a look at this definition, intelligence is not just about the present. Intelligence also talks about the past and the future. And what do I mean by that? By saying that, okay, what I want you to understand is when we talk about intelligence, we believe that past experiences help shape intelligence. So, is this person a good student when he or she was in elementary? Okay, was he ever good in math, or was he ever good in a certain skill like music? Okay, so that talks about the past. How did you acquire these skills? Okay, because if we understand the past of the individual, then that says a lot about the present. So say for example, you had a client and then his main issue is that he thinks he's not good enough for college. Okay, so what you can do is when you make your assessment report about this individual, when you take a look at his past, you can say that maybe he's just doubting himself because there is a concrete evidence that he was continually performing good, okay, from elementary until senior high school. So perhaps there's a reason why he is struggling in the present. Okay. Intelligence will also help us know something that will happen in the future. So now that you passed the entrance exam, will you be able to complete or finish college? Okay? Will you be able to do well on the job that you're applying for? That's why intelligence measurement is important on the job. And some professions will look for a certain type of intelligence. Say for example, there are those who will administer speed tests, which means that their primary focus is the speed of processing or working memory. So it may be important in professions or jobs that require you to respond quickly to the needs of your clients, etc. Okay? So it tells you about the past, the present, as well as the future. Okay? The second definition of intelligence here on the screen says that intelligence is our inherent potential for learning, how fast we are to learn, and our body of knowledge that we possess. So once again, this alternative definition talks about both the past and the future. Okay, so potential for learning is something about the future. That's why you need to take exams before you get admitted to college or before you enter med school, for example. Okay, so these exams will basically give an idea if you'll be able to understand the topics that you're going to study when you enter med school and other things, okay, related to that, such as going to law school, going to college, going to masters, etc. Okay, and how fast are you going to learn those things? Okay, so some intelligence measures will give you an idea if you'll be able to understand what you're supposed to understand in a certain profession, and it's also the body of knowledge that you possess. Okay, so when we measure your intelligence, okay, we're also assuming that we're measuring your learning from the past until the present. Okay, so you won't be able to answer an intelligence test if there is lack of learning from the past. Okay, and once you're able to answer an intelligence test, it doesn't only tell us something about your past, it also tells us something about your future. Okay, so taking an intelligence test serve a lot of purpose. Okay, it has a lot of purpose why we measure intelligence. This is not just to say something about the person. This may be about work, about academics. This may also be about coping. If the person undergoes assessment for a certain psychological disturbance, this may be about schooling for a young child. Okay, this may be about assessment of someone with autism or someone with intellectual disability. So there's a variety of reasons why we measure intelligence. Okay, so that's what I want you to understand at this point. Okay, so basically in psychological testing and assessment, which is another course in psychology, okay, I introduced the concepts of achievement and aptitude and intelligence. So we have been talking about intelligence since earlier. So how do we define aptitude and achievement? So when we say achievement, that talks about measurement of what you have learned so far, means it's focused on what you have learned on the past. Okay, so that's what achievement is. So the quizzes that you take in your subjects and the long exams that you take, those are achievement tests. Okay, because it covers something that have been taught in school, while aptitude tests on the other hand will measure some your capability or potentiality for the future. Okay, so what aptitude tests cover are less likely to be taught in school, and they're more likely to cover, things that you can learn on your own. Okay, say for example, memory. Okay, we are not taught how to master memory in school, but as we grow older, you learn some techniques on how to improve your memory. Okay, So later, we can take a look at some theories that will help us understand more about why we measure aptitude, why we measure achievement. But the si- literature is trying its best to distinguish achievement, aptitude, and intelligence. But research would say that there's really very little distinction. Okay, attempts to distinguish achievement, aptitude, and intelligence have not been so productive because these are three overlapping constructs. Okay? In other words, if you measure the past, you can somehow measure the future, even if that's not your intention. And if you measure future learning, you are also measuring the past, even if that's not your intention. Okay, so if achievement measures the past learning and aptitude is in charge of measuring future learning, intelligence basically is the overlap between the two. So it measures the past, the present, and the future intellectual capability. So let me ask you a true or false question. So is intelligence a single general capacity? Okay, literature would say neither. It's neither true or false. Why? Because some psychologists and educators would argue that intelligence is one general intercorrelated skill, whereas others argue that it is many distinct, relatively uncorrelated abilities. So, in layman's term, some would say or some would argue that intelligence is just one single capacity, and this single capacity is composed of multiple sub competencies that are related to each other. While some theories would argue that intelligence cannot be connected to each other because intelligence is composed of different competencies that are unrelated to each other. Okay, so there are two different perspectives here, and we will try to marry these perspectives as we discuss the theories later on. Okay, so let's go to the theories of intelligence, and why don't we take a look at the beginnings of intelligence measurement? Okay, so interest in intelligence began primarily in the 1900s. Okay, so they started sprouting up in the early 1900s, soon after the first modern intelligence tests appeared. Okay, actually, testing has been there for quite some time. Okay, as early as BC or BCE, before current era, when the Chinese government, okay, this was in China during BC or before current era, and then in the BC era, Chinese governments were primarily assessing people who are interested to take positions in the government. So it makes sense, right? That if you want to be a public official, then you must be, you know, capable of holding such position. Okay, so testing has been there for quite some time, but the modern intelligence tests have emerged in the 1900s, and the first individual intelligence test was developed in the 1905 by Theodore Simon and Alfred Binet. And this was the Binet-Simon test of 1905. And what's the reason why they made their own intelligence test? They were tasked by the French government to screen primary school children, okay, for potential learning difficulties, so that these children with difficulties in learning can be given additional attention, or what we call today as special education. Okay, so they made their own way to assess the capabilities of these children by creating their own individual tests, which is, if I remember it right, it was composed of 30 items with increasing difficulty. Okay, so you might be asking, is the Binet-Simon test available until today? Yes, it is available by the name of um, Stanford Binet 5 or the SB5. So that's the new name of the Binet-Simon test because along through the years it has gone a lot of revisions and revisions until it has now become the Stanford Binet intelligence test. Okay, and other than that, we also have the Wechsler, which we will talk about later on. But this is the first intelligence test, the Binet-Simon test, or the what we call now as the Stanford Binet test. Okay, it's called Stanford Binet because one of the clinicians who worked on the revisions of the Binet test was Louis Terman, who was associated with the Stanford University. That's why it was called Stanford Binet test, fifth edition. Okay, and then that's the first intelligence test. On the other hand, the first group, okay, the Binet-Simon test is for individual administration, meaning only one person can receive or can can undergo the test at a time. Okay, you cannot administer the test to multiple individuals at the same time. So it may not be that efficient if you have to screen a lot of individuals. And then World War II came, they had to screen the soldiers who are interested in joining the army. Okay? Sorry, World War One came, and then they were interested in screening the soldiers who wanted to join the army. So there are a lot of people who wanted to join the army. That's why it would take a lot of time if they would use individual approach in measuring intelligence. That's why um, there need to be a group measure of intelligence. Okay? And Robert Yerkes came up with what we call Army Alpha and Army Beta, which are the first group intelligence tests. Okay, the difference between Army Alpha and Army Beta is that Army Alpha is a test made for literate soldiers or those who can read and write, while the Army Beta test is made for soldiers who have difficulties or totally unable to read or write. That's why the Army Beta test will focus on questions that will not require reading comprehension, and that would be more of, say for example, strength training, okay, visual acuity, etc. Okay, so these two tests, the Binet-Simon test and the Army Alpha and Army Beta test, have big contributions in the history of intelligence testing. Okay. All right, then eventually other theories of intelligence have emerged, and this is one of the most famous theories of intelligence. Okay, the G factor theory by Charles Spearman. Okay, so according to Charles Spearman, okay, remember I asked you earlier, so what do you believe? Is intelligence a single concept, or is intelligence a multidimensional concept? Okay, so those who believe that intelligence is a single construct can be a follower of Spearman. Why? Spearman developed the first theory of intelligence and proposed that it is best thought of as a single general capacity or ability. So, in other words, he believed that intelligence is best described as a single ability, not multiple abilities. Okay, but he doesn't mean that we cannot subdivide intelligence. What he means to say is that although there are many types of intelligence, at the end of the day, it can be represented by a single ability, which is called the G, which stands for general ability. Okay, and then this G can be divided into multiple types, which is called S, or specific abilities. And according to him, the three major S, or the three major specific abilities, are as follows: verbal, spatial, and quantitative. So what I'm saying here is that person A and person B and person C may differ in their competencies when it comes to verbal, spatial, and quantitative, and they may show different patterns. Okay, one may be good in verbal, the other may be good in spatial. But at the end of the day, we can compare them easily by looking at their general ability. Or in today's language, this is your IQ score. Okay, that's why people nowadays, or are very curious what is their IQ score, and they do their best to measure the IQ score, and sometimes they rely on unreliable methods or invalid methods such as those found in Facebook. I'm going to tell you that those are not valid measures of intelligence, because the valid measures of intelligence are those that psychologists would administer to you, like the SB5 or the Wechsler test. Okay, and then later we're going to talk about them. But going back to Spearman, what are the two parts again? The G and the S, the general and specific. And for him, here are the three specific capabilities. The first is verbal intelligence, or the ability to solve problems and analyze information using language-based reasoning. So if you're the kind of kid back then who likes to answer those questions in the English textbook, then we can say that you're verbally you're using a lot of your verbal intelligence. Okay, so problems written as words, that's your forte. Okay, when you were in mathematics class, it's easier for you to write numbers in words. Okay, it's easier for you to write 100,000 pesos. Okay, so because you're very good in understanding verbal, written, or language based information. Other than that, we also have the spatial intelligence. And when we say spatial intelligence, it is important in navigating, visualizing, okay, objects from different angles. So those people with well-developed spatial intelligence end up being good in navigation. Driving may be easy for them. Sorting may be easy for them. Okay, so they're very good with visualizing objects. Maybe they will be a good architect. They will be good engineers. Okay, so that's the advantage of having a good spatial intelligence. So don't expect that these people who are spatially intelligent that they will be lost when you leave them somewhere that they're not familiar with, because for sure they're going to find their way. All right. So the next in type of intelligence here is quantitative intelligence, which is basically the one that we use in reasoning and problem solving when we are dealing with mathematical operations and using logic. Okay, so you're very good with mathematics, you like computation, you like addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, etc. So that's quantitative knowledge. Okay, it's easy for you to count or keep tabs on things. It's easier for you to keep your money and compute and to know how much money do you have. That's why you may pursue a career related to quantitative intelligence, such as statistics, mathematics, etc. Okay, so the theory of Spearman was very influential when it comes to test construction because it implies that all abilities that a person can be represented by a single number, or what we call his overall IQ score. So in other words, if your IQ in an intelligence test is 115, then you are more intelligent than a person whose IQ is 100. Okay? So that's how we interpret IQ scores. And later we will have more on IQ scores, but the advantage of Spearman's theory is that he believes that all your abilities can be summarized into one single number. So we don't have to report multiple abilities. Okay, so of course there are shortcomings and weaknesses if you adhere to his approach or theory. Okay, so for those of you who did not believe that intelligence can be summarized or summed up into just one type of intelligence, may be a follower of other theories that we're going to talk about. Say, for example, here, let's talk about Louis Thurstone. He is the proponent of multiple factor theory of intelligence. So do not be confused, okay? If we say multiple intelligences, that's by Gardner. But if we say multiple factor theory of intelligence, that's by Thurstone. Okay, so Thurstone is a very familiar name to those who study intelligence, okay, and to those who like intelligence testing. He's one of the most influential, okay, theories of intelligence. Okay, so now let's take a look at this. So his perspective is that he argues that different aspects of intelligence are distinct enough that multiple abilities can be considered, not just one. So, according to him, we differ when it comes to the following, and there are 7 ways that we differ with each other. These are the 7 primary mental abilities. Okay, so word fluency. Okay, so those who are good with words, those who are good with pronunciations, etc. So that's word fluency. Number facility, so basically mathematical stuff. Spatial visualization, I think that I've already explained that to you earlier. Associative memory, for those who like to memorize using songs, or those who like to memorize by associating it with something, or those who are very good in what, let's say, for example, looking for look-alikes or rhyming, etc. So that may be associative memory. So you may be good in conditioning, okay, classical conditioning. Perceptual speed. When we say perceptual speed, it's easier for you to process incoming information. Okay, and to understand and interpret that information. Say, for example, I'm dictating the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to you. Then I told you, arrange that from greatest to least. Then it's easy for you to rearrange that set of numbers. Okay, you have a good working memory. And finally, those who are good in what we call reasoning or the use of logic. So major premise, minor premise, then your conclusion. Okay, now, so that's his view. He differ with Spearman, which we talked about earlier, because Spearman believes that although there are different types of intelligence, all of them can be summed up into one number, which is the G, or the general IQ. Okay, but according to Louis Thurstone, he believes that there are 7 distinct abilities. Hence, it would be futile if we're going to sum up all these numbers, because they're supposed to be 7 different abilities. Okay, that cannot be combined together into one. Okay, so choose. Okay, if you're a believer of a single type of intelligence, or if you're a believer of multiple intelligences. Okay, by the way, I did not mention to you earlier that Spearman is also known for what we call the factor analysis, which is basically used in advanced statistics. Okay, it was used by the likes of Allport, by the likes of, sorry, not Allport, but rather Raymond Cattell, which we will talk about in personality psychology. Okay, and so Spearman is also credited for the idea of reliability, which can be discussed in detail in psychological testing and assessment. Okay, so talking about Raymond Cattell, let's now talk about his theory of intelligence, the fluid and crystallized intelligence. Okay, so according to Raymond Cattell, there are 2 major types of intelligence, the fluid and crystallized. So what is the distinction between the two? Okay, I hope that you can relate this to what I'm talking about earlier. Okay, so when we say fluid intelligence, okay, what we mean by fluid intelligence is that it is used in dealing with new information or new problems. Okay, that's why it's fluid. So what makes it fluid is the fact that it is not influenced by past learning, and it is supposed to be not influenced by culture. Okay, so say for example, memorization is something that everybody can do regardless of culture. We cannot say that culture A is better than culture B when it comes to memorizing. Okay, it is not culture bound. Memorizing numbers is not affected by culture. Okay, it's not influenced by past learning, which means that if I tell you my cell phone number, you can memorize it even if you do not possess the necessary past what's this necessary competencies that you have acquired from the past. So that's fluid intelligence. Okay? So the other type of intelligence is crystallized. So when we say crystallize, this is the type of intelligence, okay, characterized by using already learned skills, experience, and knowledge to solve problems. Meaning that when you solve problems using crystallized intelligence, you are relying on what you know so far. Okay, say for example, this analogy. If puppy is to dog, blank is to cat. Okay, so kitten is to cat. Okay, so if you haven't gone to school yet, and you don't and or if you haven't encountered the word kitten and you don't know what a kitten is, can you answer this one? No. Okay, that's why there are questions in exams that most of the teachers would encourage elimination technique or method when answering exams. However, that may not work all the time if the question requires your crystallized intelligence, or if we'll ask you a certain question that you will not be able to answer unless you really know the correct answer. Say for example, I will ask you, who is the proponent of, or who is the theories, or who is the developer behind the thematic apperception test? So it's hard for you to eliminate possible distractors if you don't know what thematic apperception test is and you don't know the people who are mentioned in the choices. Okay, so crystallized intelligence. Is it influenced by education? Yes. Is it influenced by culture? Yes. Fluid intelligence, not supposed to be influenced by both culture and education. So here's the application part now. Okay, so say for example, you are assessing a person, okay, who was not able to have proper education. Okay, so which of the two do you think will be more developed? You're assessing a child who did not have proper education and he is undergoing assessment because you're planning to make him, his parents or those who adopted him plan to enroll him in school. Okay, so that's the reason for referral. Okay, they referred this child to you. So which would be more developed if the person, say for example, is 10 years old but he did not go to school yet? Which of the two is more developed, crystallized or fluid? Fluid. Okay, it's not crystallized. We can expect that he may have delays on crystallized intelligence. Okay, but definitely he knows some things that has something to do with fluid. Okay, like he may have the competencies to memorize, to analyze, as long as it would not require past learning. Okay, so later I can show you more examples about this in the part 2 of our discussion, but I would like to go deeper in my explanation here. Fluid or crystallized? I will add another dichotomy, verbal and non-verbal. Let's associate the four. Okay, let's pair them. Okay, so which do you think is associated with crystallized? Verbal or non-verbal? It should be verbal. Okay, although not all the time, verbal is more associated with crystallized, like what you read in text, what you say, okay, what you understand through language. Remember, language is once again related to culture, while non-verbal is more likely to be associated with fluid. Okay, so even though the person doesn't know how to speak your language or doesn't know how to speak English properly, if he or she has enough fluid intelligence, then he or she may still solve problems or may still understand concepts that are presented using, say for example, pictures. Okay, because picture is a non-verbal stimulus. Okay, and you can help these people, those who were not able to go to school, by using non-verbal methods such as pictures, role playing, etc. Now let's take a look at this example here on the screen. Okay, so this is an example item from a test called RPM, or the Raven's Progressive Matrices. Okay, so what is the instruction here is that I think some of you may have taken this when you were in grade school, because some practitioners will use this with children or grade schoolers. So the typical instruction here is that what is missing in this part. Okay, and then you have to choose from 1 to 8. Okay, so you have to analyze this carefully. Okay, now, okay, so based on what you can see on the screen, is this question verbal or non-verbal? Okay, it's non-verbal. Why? It doesn't rely on words. It doesn't rely on problem solving that are presented with the use of sentences, but rather it use of they use a picture and made you complete the picture or the pattern or the matrix. Okay, so these types of non-verbal questions, what do they measure? Your fluid or your crystallized intelligence? So they are more likely to measure your fluid, which means that it doesn't require you to go to school to solve such problem. Okay, it is not a requirement in this question. There are some questions that require school-based knowledge, which I will show you later, and they tap your crystallized intelligence. So let me ask you now, can you give this type of question to a child who wasn't able to go to school? Yes or no? Yes, because it doesn't measure crystallized, but rather it focuses on fluid. Okay, so that's one type of question that we can maximize when assessing children which may have delayed schooling. Okay, so these are the non-verbal tests of intelligence. So one example of non-verbal test would be the RPM, or the Raven's progressive matrices. Okay, so let's take a look at other existing theories of intelligence. So now let's take a look at the Cattell-Horn-Carroll model. Okay, so this is an integration of what has been proposed by Cattell, extended by Horn and by Carroll. Okay, now, according to the CHC model, there are three levels of intelligence: general, or similar to Spearman's G; broad intelligence, which corresponds to things like intelligence, memory, learning, and processing speed; and the narrow intelligence include the distinct abilities that we have. So say, for example, a specific type of memory is memorizing the alphabet, or memorizing cell phone numbers, or memorizing songs, etc. Okay, learning chess, learning something related to sports, learning something related to math. So those are the narrow intelligences. So now let's take a look at an illustration that will help us understand the CHC model. All right, so here's the illustration of the CHC model. So basically, what's on the top are the general characteristics or capability, which is the G factor by Spearman. So what you can see is that theories nowadays have built on what Spearman has proposed, okay, and they extended that. So basically, the CHC is the widely used theory of intelligence nowadays. Okay, and under the G factor, there are a number of broad intelligences. So here are the fluid and crystallized intelligence by Raymond Cattell, and other theories have added the other factors here, and they, according to them, these are also important things to know or to measure if you're going to create an intelligence test. And if we measure these things, it is believed that we are somehow given an idea how a person will perform in real life. And these are his specific cognitive perceptual speed tests, okay, used in cognitive ability. So, in other words, an intelligence test is actually not just one test, but a series of tests. Say, for example, one intelligence test may have 10 subtests, and these 10 subtests are specific tasks that measures the different intelligence tests, which at the end of the day can be summed into one number, which is the G factor, or the general IQ, or some would call it full scale IQ. And going back to the Stanford Binet, the Stanford Binet is based on the CHC model of intelligence. Okay, because it has the ability to give us the full scale IQ, which has two major divisions: the verbal and the non-verbal IQ. Okay, which are basically similar to fluid and crystallized intelligence. Okay, then after the CHC model, there are also other existing theories of intelligence out there that we must include in our discussion, and one of them is by Robert Sternberg. And Robert Sternberg is a known psychologist. He is actually the author of your book in cognitive psychology, and according to him, he proposed a triarchic theory of intelligence, which are composed of three: analytic, creative, and practical. When we say analytic intelligence, it involves judging, evaluating, or comparing and contrasting information. So, say for example, you're presented different perspectives of different people. You have to evaluate which of them is telling the truth, and then you have to come up with a certain conclusion. So, that's analytic intelligence. Or, say for example, you're using your analytic intelligence now because what we're doing is I'm telling you various theories or competing models in intelligence, and I want you to analyze similarities and difference between them, comparing and contrasting them with each other. It is followed by what we call creative intelligence, which is your capability to deal with fresh and useful ideas. Ability to use useful ideas for solving problems, or your ability to acquire new knowledge. So basically, this is related to what we call the fluid intelligence. Okay, so say for example, it is your first time to do something, first time to learn correlation, first time to learn a certain approach in therapy. If you have a good creative intelligence, then you're more likely to quickly pick up on things that you have to learn. And lastly, we also have practical intelligence or capability to solve problems in everyday life. So intelligence is not just all about schooling, not just about analytics, not just about creativity, sometimes also about solving our day-to-day problems, okay? The problems or what we call the disturbances in our routine. So if you have a good practical intelligence, then you can apply what you learned in dealing with day-to-day problems, okay? In solving, for example, conflicts in the office, conflicts in school, and other related stuff. Okay, then finally, okay, for the first part of our discussion, I'm going to end here, and in the next part of our discussion, the main focus of our discussion would be more of how to measure intelligence. Okay, so according to Howard Gardner, okay, I think that so many of you are familiar with this. Okay, so there are different types of intelligences in his theory of multiple intelligences: linguistic, okay, ability to learn, understand, or use both spoken and written language. So they are more likely to become poets, writers, lawyers, politicians, linguists, etc. And those or some of you are good in logical mathematical, so mathematical stuff, performing operations, more likely to become scientists, engineers, accountants, and related other fields related to these. Musical, okay. So as you can see, here's the shortcoming of other theories that we talked about earlier. I don't think that any of them have mentioned musical intelligence. Okay, so we can also consider intelligence. Okay, so there are a lot of intelligences that somehow are not measured in the tests that are existing. Okay, so musical intelligence is for musicians, for dancers, for songwriters. Okay, bodily kinesthetics or the ability to use body or parts to solve problems and create products. Say, for example, athletes, dancers, mechanics, craftspeople, etc. And spatial, we have been talking about this since earlier. So it's important for navigators, pilots, architects, sculptors, etc. And as future psychologists, we must have good interpersonal intelligence or empathy, our ability to understanding the motivations, thoughts, intentions, desires of people, so they can be good psychologists, social workers, teachers, and politicians. And others are good intrapersonally or understanding their own behavior, thoughts, feelings, and motivations. So psychologists once again, and some of them are monks, priests, etc. And finally, naturalistic, those who have the capability to relate with nature, with animals, with plants, so they are good in the following fields as naturalists, biologists, botanists, veterinarians, hunters, farmers, etc. Okay, so before you went to college, maybe some sort of intelligence or aptitude test was given to you to help you decide on which course you're going to take. So now, as psychology students, perhaps you have an idea of how did they come up with these measures of intelligences. So of course, they have to come from a certain theory, and from that theory they develop items, and this will help you. Okay, if you're good at some type of intelligence, then expectedly you will also be good in the fields that are related to that intelligence. That's why I think most of you are intelligent intrapersonally or interpersonally. That's why you decided to pursue a career in psychology. So basically, that is it for our first discussion in intelligence. In our next discussion, we are going to talk about how to measure intelligence. Okay, so that's it for the first part.